It's Arnold Palmer Invitational Week. This is going to be weird for me. Rickie Fowler not in the field. Again, I know you don't necessarily associate players with golf tournaments necessarily in terms of just them being in it, but like I do associate Rickie Fowler with Arnold Palmer. What is up, everybody? How you living? No putts given. People are going to say, "Oh, well, that's." I can already hear the people yelling. As I'm watching, it seemed like there were a lot of lab putters in play. There were. There were. By my count, I had something like 12 just as I was watching different players. And you say, well, okay, how big is the field? This, that, whatever. But at one point in time, looking at the leaderboard on Sunday, and this was just the leaderboard, like Michael Kim, JJ Swan, Rickie Fowler, which again, I know Rickie did not play well in the last day, Bo Hostler, Svensson, Johnny Vegas, Lucas Glover, Ben Martin. Some of these guys didn't make the cut. Ben on. Some of those guys didn't make the cut again. I want to say Svensson was maybe leading the tournament strokes gained putting through three rounds. I'd have to check. Maybe as you're yapping about something, I'll check that. But is it just me, or are we seeing more every single week? Am I just?
It's still.
Am I lab washed?
Yeah, it continues to tick up, which is fascinating when you consider lab in terms of widespread recognition compared to some other brands. Like I would guess more people have probably heard of Bettinardi, for example. But you're starting to see this tour play creep up to very noticeable levels. Not number one, right? They're not Odyssey, not Cameron, but noticeable. And what to me is at least interesting, and we'll see where the trends go, what happens next, what happens throughout the season. But we've talked a lot about others. I don't want to necessarily say copycats, but sort of variations, derivatives, if you will, of the lab approach. And it's going to be interesting to me to see if those other models, right, like the PXG model, the stuff Odyssey's doing, Even Roll's had some tour play in the past. Will some of their no torque, zero torque, low torque, whatever you want to call them, will those putters start to find their way into more bags on tour, or at the tour level, if you want to call it a phenomenon, is this going to be strictly a lab phenomenon in that space? So I'm curious to see where it goes. To me, it's not a surprise that more guys are putting with lab, if only because guys have had success, and we know for all the talk about these guys being fit to the nth degree and married to their equipment and all of that stuff, we also know that they are highly susceptible to trends, just like average golfers are. That's why, like, if a shaft gets hot, you'll start to see more of them in bags with putters for sure. So again, for me, it's just a curiosity. Yeah, good for lab, but what comes next? Does it continue to be a strictly lab thing, or are we going to see others get their share within that similar design space?
Yeah, it's a super good point, because Victor Hovland was using in his most recent tournament a ping center shafted model, which looks to be a ping iteration of that type of, like you said, whether we're going to call it zero torque, no torque, low torque, CG balance, toe up, whatever we want.
Torque.
Yeah, exactly. Do players that play Odyssey gravitate toward that? Rickie Fowler's maybe a really good example of that, because Rickie was absolutely part of the resurgence of the counterbalance putter, right? Between Rickie and Wyndham Clark and Keegan, it was like jailbreak madness, in the Odyssey space. And that was a trend, right? We saw that very definitively for a while. Then everybody and their mom started making counterbalance, 38-inch counterbalance putters, and don't feel like we hear a ton about that right now, although it's there. Does this become, like you said, more exclusively a lab thing, or a viable option in other brands, putter space?
And I don't wish anybody ill will. Like I'm happy to see lab success, but at the same time, you don't know if this suddenly crashes and burns, right? Because that happens too in the tour space, where all of a sudden something that was hot just all but entirely disappears. And granted, some things are tech driven and some things get popular for other reasons. But I mean, there was a period of time where red putters were the thing.
I was going
right?
to say, what's
like,
the last one? Yeah, what's a good
yeah,
example?
everyone was like red putters, and TaylorMade and Callaway were kind of going back and forth in this tit for tat to see who could out red putter the other guy.
Right.
And then, kind of disappeared. And again, that's more paint than performance. But point being, like, it's not unheard of that a tour trend just suddenly dies off either. I don't expect that's going to happen, but it could.
Anything else you can think of, like tour trend wise, that could die off? Like you said, things can come, and you're right. There's trends. It's a copycat industry. Things evolve. We've seen more mallet putters in play.
I don't think we'll be seeing a resurgence in blades. I think there's enough evidence now that suggests that the stability benefits of mallets probably outweigh anything you get from a blade. I mean, there's always going to be one-off guys, right? Some guys will always putt better with a blade. There's always a guy or some guys. Likewise, right? We've seen the movement away from classic pure muscle back / blade irons to more cavity back, with T100 kind of being the tour standard now. I don't think you're ever going to see that trend go back, where all of a sudden guys are like, you know what, let's just go back to blades. That's not going to happen. So,
Yeah, especially in those longer irons. Like I said, whatever percentage it is on tour that plays some type of a combo set, meaning they're not playing 4 irons through pitching wedge in one muscle. If they're playing muscle backs, they're playing 6 through wedge, 7 through wedge, maybe 5
8
through wedge, but not 3 through wedge. That's done. Yeah. So interesting. Who knows? Maybe we'll see that. The other thing, I saw a little bit more of 2 woods, where, like I said, we're going to have this mini driver test that we're going to do as well. You and I were talking about this before too, is like, what are a couple trends or things we may see more of now that we're seeing other things launch? No doubt the putters. Okay, we got that. But I think it's mini drivers. That's my second one that I feel like, to the degree that there's a trend of new stuff coming out, particularly with that tournament down in Georgia coming up and not super long.
Yeah, I think we've talked about kind of the emergence of the 7 wood on tour. And I think a lot of it has to do with, a lot of it's distance related, as guys have gotten longer, maybe not to the extent that the USGA would have you believe, as we've talked about, right? The idea that guys are just going driver wedge all day is a myth.
Right.
But we have arguably reached the point where the 3 wood has been eclipsed in terms of its necessity in the bag. So you don't see guys hitting 3 wood off the deck on tour much anymore. So that's become 4 wood, maybe in 5 wood space. Some guys, go right to the 7 wood even. So that mini driver has become the 3 wood replacement for, not when I necessarily have to hit it straighter. Again, another myth, right? That the 3 wood is noticeably straighter than the driver, but one of those, like, I need to hit it shorter. I want to take a regular swing, but it needs not to go as far. And yeah, maybe at the tour level, those guys a little bit more control with a mini than a maxi, if you will. But mostly it's just for when it's important not to outkick the coverage.
Yeah, I think
so. When it becomes very fascinating at the consumer level, where I don't think too many of us are ever hitting our driver too far. I'm not saying it never happens, but there are very few situations between the courses I play where driver is too much club off the tee. And so it's kind of a little bit different conversation. And you wonder if the execution of a mini driver that makes sense on tour is entirely wrong for the average golfer. Conversation for another day, but it's definitely something to think about.
Yeah, it is. And I think maybe once that test comes out and we talk about that, talk about who is this for. You made me think of something interesting, which is, it's really hard for me to come up with a lot of shots places I play where it's like, oh man, driver's too much here. I got guys I play with that are super long that have that situation. There are times, and it's not so much about driver being too long. It's more like the course was designed to be too short, where it was like, we got one par 5 on a local muni we play where depending on the wind, again, we're in Colorado, it could be 270, 280, 290 to cover it comfortably. And it's like, okay, is it worth the risk? And it's not so much about hitting it that far. It's about the fact the hole is too short. So you need something to lay up. I also think it's maybe a little bit of a course in, course out type of club where to the degree you can move that club or hit a different shot shape, they're smaller, right? So potentially easier for players to either hit higher, lower, or turn right to left or left to right, kind of like maybe you need to do on certain holes at Augusta, most notably like 13 and others. Maybe that's part of it. I don't know. So anyway, thank you to Vortex Golf. Interesting. It's an employee-owned company. Did you know this, Tony? Employee-owned rangefinder company out of Wisconsin. They've only been around 1 year.
I did not know any of that.
Well, it's because they've only been around 1 year, relatively new to the rangefinder market. But we'll talk about some of their products later. But here's something I wanted to mention right away. I love this. More companies need to have this. They have a lifetime warranty that says exactly this. It doesn't matter how it happened, whose fault it is, or where it was purchased. They will repair or replace any product. I like that. Especially
that's pretty sweet because I have had rangefinders go bad. I have had the laser stop beaming, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And,
I've had them fall off carts.
Yeah, this was years ago. And it wasn't like I didn't drop it. Nothing happened. It just, the laser died and there was, send it in. And for just, $200 or $300, we'll fix it and send it back to you.
Right. They have 3 models: Blade, a Blade Slope, and an Anarch. But the Anarch is the top level, has all the bells and whistles, slope, etc., all of those kind of things. Image stabilization, pin spotter mode, slope feature, etc. On that top end Anarch model.
Yeah, I remember looking at this because it's kind of like, hey, this is maybe, and granted, $600. People are going to wince at that price point.
Right.
But I think maybe the most complete in terms of features. So, you get your slope and all of that stuff, but also the image stabilization, which is obviously nice for the guys who we get shaky as we get a little older. So premium price point, but one of the few that I've seen that I think can rival Bushnell for reliability as well as build quality. And then you put that warranty on top of it. It's worth considering. I'm not going to tell you this is the best rangefinder in golf and you need to get one, but
no,
robust feature set and an awesome warranty.
Yeah, and we'll see when the testing comes out where they are. But man, like I said, if it's, I've even seen them now. Like I think the MSRP was like $600. I think we've seen models $100 or $200 off of that at Shields and a couple other places. So it's like, well, if I can get something, and I know if something goes wrong, they'll just replace it. I don't mind throwing out a little bit more money, just knowing if it goes wrong at any time, again, doesn't matter where I got it, doesn't matter how it happened or whose fault it was. There'll be some jackass that takes it and throws it against a wall. Like, oh, look!
Is that jackass's name Chris?
Yeah, exactly. And why? Get my arm loosened up. Anyway, so yeah, there's Vortex rangefinders. We'll, description below. We'll have all the links and that kind of stuff. Let's talk about really cheap golf balls because that's a topic that I didn't see becoming popular. What the hell is going on, Tony? Why are people? Tell me, what is going on with cheap golf balls?
Yeah, so I mean, this was kind of just a background. Is we're looking at adding some more cheap crap, my words, to the ball test coming up, and so just kind of doing some research into that, trying to figure out like what are the legitimate top sellers in that cheap stuff category, at least ionomer. And so, we kind of figured out what that was, and I was like, let's just post it and see how people react. And yeah, it was fair to say an interesting response. Very popular article, doing massive traffic, a lot of interaction with it. So I mean, what do you want to know? What do you want to go?
Well, did anything surprise you from that, or it's the comments are always wild. So I have a couple thoughts and feelings about this, and I want to simplify it, but Did anything surprise you about this?
About the list itself or the comments
I guess kind of comments, people's feedback, like, because
yeah, I
ultimately it's
mean, there's
consumers
just
that are buying these things, right? I mean, consumers buy this stuff. You and I are the challenge is not to get into an echo chamber, all the time. And it's like, okay, like I have my perspective on this, and I love reading the comments because you remember there's 1,000 different perspectives that are out there. Sometimes, though, one of the problems with opinions is that this isn't very popular, but not all opinions are equal, because some opinions are really, really, really uninformed. And so when I read the comments on some of these things, I'm like, okay, how do we address some of this without coming off as like totally condescending and like an arrogant prick, right?
well, yeah, I mean, the word they used that came up was like, "Oh, you guys are so elitist when you talk about premium balls," and I'm like, when did the definition of elitist become providing facts that run counter to your worldview, or providing facts about things that you don't want to hear for whatever reason? And
Right.
so when we say, yeah, like these balls are cheap for a reason, they don't match the performance specification of premium balls in a number of ways. It shouldn't be considered elite to point that out. That is the reality. That being said, like, I understand why people would buy some of these balls. I get some people have a feel preference. That's weird to me, but I get it. I'll be the guy. I've talked about it before, right? I have a pattern preference. Right? I play the ball I do because Callaway is willing to put a pattern on it that I can't get in another golf ball, and it really works for me. So I get that preference is part of the equation, but if you start from performance first, and if we lived in a world, for example, where the only thing that mattered was performance, none of these balls would exist. Right. And that's not my opinion. That's me asking the people who make these golf balls to say, hey, if golfers only bought for performance, which of these balls would you make? The answer is none of them.
Right.
Absolutely none of them. And so, you want to be upset that I point that out, that's fine, but understand that some of these, by and large, are being bought for preference-driven reasons.
And I would point out
$55 is a lot for golf balls. I get that. And so my point is like, okay, well, MaxFly at 35 is a better deal, and you're getting plenty of performance. Vice in bulk, I think you can get close to 30. And if your price point is $20 or less, or $22 less,
these guys
buy Kirkland's. It's not my favorite golf ball in the world, but it's, in terms of the total performance equation, it's going to be way better than anything at a 25 or below price point. So,
and like I kind of started saying, is like, I want to simplify this as much as I can for people. And part of it is, I think what you just said is true. And if we talk to the companies, right, people that are engineers, that are in these fields, that are designing the golf balls and doing that, if you ask them, hey, what moves you? Like, what motivates you? What do you get excited about designing? They all talk to you about performance. Nobody really gets geared up and going, hey, I got my PhD in this, or I have X number of decades in R&D, and I understand dimple patterns, and I have this expertise, and I cannot wait to make a 2-piece Surlyn cover product that's going to sell for $24.99. That doesn't get them up out of bed in the morning and going, oh, this is amazing. So it really is, there's performance. And I wonder if sometimes we get in trouble because we call them premium balls. I mean, that's what the industry calls them. But premium kind of have like this elitist connotation by name alone. If it were just like tour level or something, I don't know. But it's like, you can get a premium ball. And when I'm talking premium, we're talking 3 and 4 piece, a really well done cast urethane. Some of the TPU balls are pretty good too, but a cast urethane ball, the ones that we've mentioned, whether it's Seed Golf, like you said, Vice has stuff. Obviously, MaxFly has stuff. As you go up in price points, you start to hit Wilson and others. And then we get to the absolute top of the top of Titleist. You can get that performance for $30 a dozen.
And I like the idea, call it tour level or premium construction, right? 3-piece with a urethane cover. And again, I will reiterate, it is not my favorite golf ball in the market. I can tell you what I would consider to be the performance deficiencies of the Kirkland ball.
Right.
But by the letter, that is a premium construction for under $20 a dozen. So I'm like, why would you buy Super Soft instead of that? Why would you buy True Feel instead of that if you're interested in total performance? And we've talked about things like, I was thinking about this. I'm going to give you a plug here in a second, but we've talked about, okay, they're soft. A lot of these balls are soft. Soft is going to be slower, and it's measurable until your swing speed dips, somewhere in the 80 mile an hour plus or minus range, depending on some other factors. They don't spin around the green
for you, Tony.
Right. They don't spin around the green. So that's the stuff that, and they fly. They typically will. It's interesting, kind of launch higher but descend flatter, as we've seen.
The overall trajectory is like kneecap to a grasshopper.
It's interesting. And then there's the stuff that golfers aren't fully aware of from shot to shot and may not even consider because, it's the kind of thing that's easy to overlook because it's almost the expected result. But I'll give you, the plug here is I did an interview with Marty Jertson from Ping for a story about Ballnamic, Ping's ball fitting tool, why they created it, and some of the insights they've learned. And so that story is coming out Friday. So check that out. But
plug it.
Look at, a couple of the things that are interesting. So Ballnamic has two very interesting metrics, right? It has a wind score, how well the ball does in wind. Okay. And then they have what they call a flyer score now, which I believe was the evolution of their kind of wet score. And that's one thing to keep in mind. You may not be fully aware of or may not notice because it's the expected results, but these ionomer balls may not be as good in the wind, and their performance changes significantly when they get wet. So the example I'll give, when we did the ball test 2 years ago, we did a full wedge and we compared wet spin to dry spin. And I'll talk about the Super Soft again. I'm not trying to throw shade on that ball any more than normal, I guess. But that was one of the balls we tested last time out in the ionomer category. And I want to say, don't quote me on the spin rate, but I want to say it was like 8,000, give or take, on a full wedge. Lower than anything we were seeing with urethane balls, right? So it kind of proves what we all accept to be true, right? An ionomer ball is going to spin less off a wedge. And then when we spritzed it with water, the spin dropped from 8 or 9, whatever it was, down to under 2 in some cases. Yeah. So just like this massive drop in spin. And again, if you're around the green, if you play enough golf, you expect that a wet ball is going to spin less. You know this, right? Your friction drops. You know this as golfers, even if you've never kind of thought about exactly why it happens. You know it happens. It is the expected result. But what you may not be fully cognizant of is that drop-off, that change in performance is going to be much more significant with ionomer than with urethane. So again, there are real advantages to the premium construction. That's not to say you can't go out and shoot a great round with an ionomer ball. Obviously, people do that all the time. Sure. But there are differences. They are quantifiable. They add up over time. And so, and that's before we even talk about, I'll mention it, what the hell, quality wise, right? Sure. In Ball Lab, the stuff we've looked at, I will say this, the very best ionomer balls that we've tested, the very best, and as you would expect, it's Titleist stuff, right? The very best across the market as a whole qualify as average. So the best ionomer ball, the quality is average at best. And then when we get into the bad stuff, it is on the extreme end of bad. Mm-hmm. And so you're not getting the same quality for your money. That's also a fact. But again, it's not to say you can't play good golf with them, and play them if they make you happy. I'm not telling you not to. I just want to make sure everybody understands the factual differences between ionomer and, again, premium constructions.
Right. Yeah. And no doubt somebody will say, well, but I can spin a Super Soft around the green as much as I need to. Maybe. Yeah. Probably not. You're probably actually lying. You're probably not being truthful. You're probably... Well,
and again, right, guys, I talked about this with... I talked about this just last week with somebody who works on the ball side of a major OEM business. Talked about this, guys love that ball. And there are guys who aren't looking for spin around the green, right? The way they play the game is to land it short and run it up, right? That is how you do it. And that's great. But again, there are limitations to that. That's all. It's not to say you can't play that way, but if you've got a bunker or water carry to a tight pin, you have no shot at stopping that. You can probably stop a Pro V1, something like that, a higher spinning ball. That's it, right? So there are scenarios in which that piece of equipment is not viable in terms of achieving the optimal result. And that's really it, right? It's not to say, oh, if you play this ball, you're going to play bad golf, and if you play this one, you'll play good golf, because you're going to hit bad shots with every ball. It's really that situational stuff, right? Like these little cases. And yeah, some of that situation is this thing isn't round and the core's not centered. That's a real situation. But also it's that stuff of like, all right, tucked pin, I either have to put it high with some spin, or I'm not going to get it close. And sometimes you have to accept you're not going to get it close. It's fine. Play what you want. I don't care.
Let's talk about two other new products I want to talk about, and then I'm going to ask you a question. So I was showing this one.
Oh, you got one of those, huh?
I did. Yeah.
Malcolm.
So this is
I blame AA Ron. Let's just blame AA.
So at first glance, and you're going to tell me why this isn't the case or what's unique or different about it, but this, okay, it's a 44 degree F. That's the grind, right? 44 degree SM10. It's pitching wedge replacement. We've seen others. There's 46, there's 48. Is this just a 44 degree version of what is effectively a specialty pitching wedge? Tell me why it's more than that. Is it more than that, or is that just what it is?
I mean, it is, right? Like Vokey, up until basically yesterday, as you're watching this, the lowest lofted Vokey pitching wedge you could get was 46. Now you can get a 44 with the same bounce. So it's not like they're just bending it and calling it something new. And so that's, on its face, no big deal. But if you are a specialty wedge player, meaning you don't play your set match pitching wedge, right? You like having a Vokey in that pitching wedge spot, or you could say the same thing about a gap wedge, right? Because most sets you can get a gap wedge, but a lot of us would rather play a Vokey or a Callaway Opus or a TaylorMade middle grind, whatever your favorite wedge happens to be. The issue has been that as iron sets, lofts have gotten progressively stronger, right? Like even when I started this, on a player's iron set, pitching wedges were 48 degrees.
Mm-hmm. Back in the day.
Yeah, back in the day, 48 degrees. Now, I can't remember the last time I saw anything more weakly lofted than 46. Right? That is kind of the new standard. And then when you get into players' distance and game improvement in those categories, 44, 43, 42 in some cases, you're getting these strongly lofted pitching wedges. Mm-hmm. And if you are a guy who likes having that specialty wedge in that pitching wedge spot in the bag, as I was once upon a time, when you go to a 43 degree pitching wedge as the set wedge,
right,
you could not make that jump to that 46, because the bending obviously had serious implications for performance. Absolute nightmare. So my story, right? I was a Vokey 46 wedge guy. Mm-hmm. Changed iron sets, and so I had this big gap, like 20 yards between my 9-iron and my pitching wedge. So that's not really sustainable. I might love that specialty wedge because I like the low trajectory with more spin, but can only hit it so far. So huge gap. So when I got fit into the T350s, I begrudgingly moved to the set wedge. But and that fixed the gap. That fixed the gap between the 9-iron and the pitching wedge. Created a new gap between the pitching wedge and the gap wedge, which I fixed when SM10 came out, when I moved from the 50 degree gap wedge to the 48. So like we're evenly spaced now, but in all of this, I lost a wedge that I loved because it had to come out. And so now I have this option of going to this 44. I'd probably bend it 1 degree to get it to 43, but whatever. I have this option of putting now a specialty wedge in the bag as my pitching wedge again, because again, I like that lower trajectory. I like that spinnier trajectory than I get with the set match wedge. So it's not something you have to have. It's not going to set the world on fire. It's not going to change people's lives.
No.
But if you like that that aftermarket / specialty option in the pitching wedge spot in the bag, and you play something like I do with, again, a pitching wedge that's typically 43, 44 degrees, now you've got an option you didn't have.
And you
It
already
seems like
answered
it.
this.
I'm like, why did it take so long to sort this one out? Because it feels like it should have been done years ago. It's that obvious.
You already answered this, but I want to make this point clear too, is because people ask sometimes like, well, why why would I want to do one of two things? Either play, because we see this on a lot of game improvement irons where they'll have like a matching gap or even sand wedge where it matches the set, and the other side of it being a specialty wedge that doesn't match the set. So like you said, like SM10, right? That's Vokey's line. Let's stick with Titleist for examples. You got your T350s. I got my T150s. Do I play a T150 pitching wedge or do I play an SM10 pitching wedge? And the point that you made, and I just want to be clear about this, it's a launch and spin conversation. The specialty wedge in general, like the SM10 in this case, will tend to launch a little bit lower with a little bit more spin. So to the degree, and I've seen this be really successful for guys that hit a lot of off-speed wedge shots, that like to do that, or that's part of their game, or they need to be able to do that. They're comfortable saying, hey, yeah, my stock wedge is 140, but when I land on 132, I'd rather just peel a little pitching wedge in there than try to go full throttle on a gap wedge or whatever the case is. So that's really kind of the decision point.
Yeah, for me, and we talk about what is optimal trajectory with a wedge, right? We talk about half the loft -1 for launch angle and things like that. And when you have like a T350, something that has a wider sole and a ton of weight down there, it's hard to keep that flight down.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's part of it. And then even when I'm just around the green, right? Like soft little pitch shots, not full throttle, but even with that, even on those shots with that low, really deep CG, it tends to kind of want to just jump up a little bit.
Yeah.
Again, I want that flatter kind of hopping, bounce a couple times and be done.
Mm-hmm.
And I just find it's easier to hit that shot with a specialty wedge.
Mm-hmm.
Again, some people may not want to do that, and if you don't, you're going to be fine with your set match wedge. This is not set match wedges. Set match wedges suck. I mean, some of them do. And the reason is they don't bother to put actual wedge grooves on them. So,
right.
They're not actually designing these wedges to be wedges, which is, problematic to say the least. But and even that's gotten better. But it really is. It's trajectory and spin. So.
Mm-hmm. Damn it, Callaway, you did it again. You did it again.
I don't.
Conforming list. I shake my fist at you. Why am I shaking my fist, Tony? What
I love, so the Callaway Elite, is it Max? TD Max, right? Not Max Triple Diamond Max. So just like they did last year with the Callaway Paradigm AI Smoke Triple Diamond Max, we now have just the Elite Triple Diamond Max on the USGA list. Humorously, the one on the list is currently just left-hand only. I expect that's going to change. That would be great, though. That would be all credit to Callaway if they said, you know what, we're just going to do something special for the lefties, and this time the righties are the ones who can suck it.
Right.
But USGA conforming the TD Max variant of Elite, just in time to miss out on most wanted testing. It's hard to know what to expect from this, but we do know like the Paradigm AI Smoke version proved to be, again, they did the same thing, right? Kind of came a little later than everything else, but not so much later that people weren't still interested in buying it.
Right.
And so, it is. It's going to be curious to see what the reception of this is, and I'm struggling a little bit. Like, I understand the idea, right? TD Max fits between the main one. They dropped Max from the Elite name, but performance that fits somewhere between the standard model and Triple Diamond. But Triple Diamond changed enough this year with being more playable, more neutral, not necessarily super low spin. I'm not entirely sure where it fits. Maybe it's just kind of a max with the triple diamond weighting system. So if you can go up and down instead of left to right as kind of a fitting philosophy. But certainly I feel like there's less room to navigate between the two models.
That was going to be my question for you is last year I felt like there was an obvious space in between when we when triple, again, talking paradigm, triple diamond was lower spinning, lower launching, pretty unforgiving, if you will. If we were going to make a comparison, right, it'd be like, okay, so triple diamond was kind of like GT4 and the max was kind of like GT2. And it was like, okay, there's room for a GT3 product in here. Callaway came out
and
with
I remember you and I hitting AI Smoke last year, hitting triple diamond and loving kind of the ball speed and the lower spin, but also acknowledging that the max flew straighter and was kind of easier to control, and just thinking, man, like if there's something right between these two, I think it would be awesome. And there it was.
Yeah.
With Elite Triple Diamond, I'm not saying it's perfect, but I was very much more like, yeah, this is really good right where it is. I don't feel like I want it to be much more like the standard model. Like this, right. I'm really happy right here.
Right.
So different experience than the year before. And again, probably a more playable triple diamond this year for sure. Way more playable. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, cool. Where does this TD Max fit in? So that'll be interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, it'll be interesting for sure. And last thing here, I'm wearing my Arnold Palmer. This is a Arnold Palmer piece from Puma last year. It's Arnold Palmer Invitational Week. This is going to be weird for me. Rickie Fowler not in the field. Again, I know you don't necessarily associate players with golf tournaments necessarily in terms of just them being in it, but like I do associate Rickie Fowler with Arnold Palmer. And so to the degree that other people feel the same way, and maybe you do, maybe you don't, but I think of Rickie a lot like probably, I was not obviously alive and attending golf tournaments when Mr. Palmer was in his heyday, but played a fair amount of golf with his grandson, Sam, and would tell stories. And
look at you just name dropping your rap bastard.
Just one. But Rickie seems to embody a lot of those same traits in terms of how he treats, players, fans, sponsors. People love him. You don't hear companies talk about Rickie like, God, I can't wait to get rid of that guy or whatever. Like
and we hear a lot of kind of the behind the scenes stuff. Like we could run down here's everybody the brands absolutely hate working with.
Yeah. Yes.
And Rickie's not that guy.
It's just
just not that guy.
If he hit the free market, even though his play hasn't been great, certainly as of late, but man, so not having him at I wonder what Puma's sitting there going like, oh man, like, because I'm sure they had scripting set out.
Like what are sponsors exemptions for, if not this situation? Like,
that's a good question. I saw Jordan Spieth's comment, kind of like, hey, well, I guess I should have played better injured last year, and I'm like, maybe you should have just played better. You sound kind of whiny, Jordan. Like, I'm not sure that you're the one that I would use it on. The Rickie piece, though, like, I mean, again, it's up to the tournament to decide for whatever reasons they want, and I'll never begrudge them that. If it's to sell more tickets, if it's to satisfy a favor you owed somebody, whatever the case is, you can do it for whatever reason you want. But like, I just feel like Rickie and the Arnold Palmer Invitational, if there's something that should historically go together like that, I kind of do. Anyway, we'll have more stuff next week to talk about. You'll have thoughts, feelings. Again, all the Vortex stuff.
Dynamic story will be out. We'll talk about it next week, but read it on Friday. That's your homework.
Yeah, read it on Friday. That's your homework. Go check out Vortex Rangefighters. Let us know if you think they're any good, and we'll rock and roll from there. Until then, we out.